Welcome to the cutting room floor. My name is my name is not Pastor Johnny, but I'm Johnny. I'm a pastor at Yosemite Lakes Community Church. I'm joined with Daniela.
Good morning, everyone.
And then also Kaiser, a valued member of our community and congregation, but also a relative newbie. So we're excited to get to know him some more and invited him. So Kaiser, real quick, how about you just kind of let us know a little bit about, you introduce yourself and also just kind of like your journey, your God story. How did you end up in YLP and on this podcast?
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. My wife and I, we got the calling to move up to the mountains about 6 months ago or so. We were in Sanger, California. We just wanted to move up to the hill. We want to have some space, spread out. We've got three little girls. So we figured, why not before school starts, let's do it. So we just up and sold our house and we moved up here. We had been attending Via Church in Clovis for about 10 years. My wife led worship there all those years. So I was kind of the dad, and I'd bring the kids to church and watch mom sing. And she was, she grew up as a worship leader through different churches. And then myself, I grew up in Fresno, went to New Covenant Church. It was kind of my home church with my family, and made my way to a few different churches just kind of as a young kid. And I went down south to Long Beach for college. So I was down there, and that's when I met my wife. So we moved here, and now we're up in Yosemite Lakes area. We're off 415, so we're close to the park. And so we just the first few weeks we attended our church down in Fresno and Clovis, and we're kind of like, well, why are we doing this? Like, we don't live here. We have lots of friends there that are great, but let's serve our community that we're close to. You know what I mean? And we want to meet people where we are, and we want to affect people where we are, etc. So that's what led us to Yosemite Lakes. We figured, let's just try it out. And so now we're here and we're enjoying it and meeting people. And we really enjoy the community. It's been great.
Well, that's awesome, man. It's always neat to hear people's story and kind of how they ended up in YLP, because I grew up here. So it's kind of foreign to me, this idea that YLP is like this invisible secret town in the mountains that not a lot of people know, because obviously if they are on 41, they're heading towards like Yosemite mostly. And so to hear the call of God to go to the mountains, and specifically just this area, I just think that's super neat. One, because it's kind of random in the sense of like, I'm sure you guys probably wrestle with like, really, Lord, like what is that about? And I just commend you guys' faith, man, like to be willing to hear a word from the Lord and then to put such serious action to it and obedience to sell your house. Like, so you sold when? Like you said 6 months ago, or when did your house sell?
We bought our house up here about 4 months ago. Like I said, we just kind of left. We were just kind of like, let's try something new. And then, I didn't know anything about Yosemite Lakes. I'm not sure if my wife did either, really. I mean, we have like one group of friends here that, we've known from down the hill that was kind of like, it's a good church, whatever. Yeah. But other than that, it was kind of like, let's try it out,
Yeah.
It's completely, I don't know if you know anything about Via Church, which is a great church that we love, but it's very different as far as like that's very more bigger scale and more lights and cameras, and it's awesome. We loved it. Nothing, all good things, of course. So coming here where it's more like homey and smaller and different connections, and definitely brings me more of a place of like, or both of us, we both talked about it, more of like our roots in a way of like, it feels very like we're at home, even though we don't know anyone. Now we're starting to, but before we literally didn't know anyone. So, but still kind of felt this weird sense of home.
That's beautiful, man. I know for us, we, and I think Daniela can attest to this too, if I've heard some of her testimony, just like, that's what matters for us is like, you called it roots. And that's a beautiful way to do it, because this church has been here since I should know this since I work here. I'm going to say 1970. I think it's like Easter of 1970. That could be totally wrong. Maybe it's 80. I thought it was an even number. Anyways, but we're coming up, I think, on like generation 2 or 3 of families that have been a part of like the breaking ground and then having kids, and now those kids are having kids. I'm technically, I guess, a second generation YLCC-er, but my parents, the same kind of thing, you know, wanted to live in a place where they could raise a family, and this church was here, and it serves that purpose really well of helping to come alongside parents and discipling young families. And we want to continue to expand that, obviously, because that's how churches last transgenerationally, is when you're cradle to the grave and not just servicing one specific age group. So I'm super glad that that's been your guys' experience.
Yeah. I mean, we like I said, nothing but good things to say. And one thing that I've learned, and this might be a little deeper and a little different, but what's really been kind of learning, I guess, and just kind of experiencing of now going to new church and being down there and seeing the different, you know, ways that a church interacts, whether it's with the people, what they do on stage, how they speak. It's kind of been cool to kind of see, like, there's so many different ways you can do it, but really, really what matters is going to be the community, you know, obviously what you're talking about, but just like kind of the way that, like, it doesn't matter if you're singing hymns or you're rocking out. It's really the deep intention. And that's kind of what I've really, you know, explored in myself of like, wow, that's really that matters. It doesn't really matter what we're doing. It's really why we're doing it and reaching out to other people, you know. So that's the
part I think every pastor wish every one of the congregates had, because essentially, because that heart doesn't exist in everybody, then we can't make everybody happy. Like, so you play a hymn, but then it's too slow, or you play a fast song, it's too loud, or, you know, and then each group, what I tell my daughters, if everybody's selfish, nobody's happy.
Yeah.
I had this experience as a young person at this church where I went to the first service, which used to be our traditional service where we played just hymns and older music. And there was a song called like Sunshine in My Soul Today. And in my own opinion, it was corny. It was weird. It was wordy. It was like all these, like, you know, preferentially negative attributes. But I was in a place with my relationship with God that, like, I just want to worship Jesus. And maybe I wasn't singing that song specifically, but to be in the presence of God with brothers and sisters transcended the methodology of that music. And so I always try to hold on to that and then invite people into it. Like, this may not be your cup of tea, or this may not be your expression that you are used to or like, but if we can all come centered on elevating Jesus, then we're going to be in a unity that God loves and died for. So
yeah,
thank you for having that heart.
Yeah,
okay, let's jump into the cutting room floor part of this whole thing. So Pastor David preached on Sunday, and he kicked off our new covenant series called The Covenants of God, and it was the covenant of creation. So Daniela, just what was your biggest takeaway, the thing you remember, or like what moved you the most from this last Sunday sermon?
Yeah. Man, this past Sunday was really good. You know, kind of what we were talking about a little earlier, Johnny and I had a pre-conversation, just a little bit, guys, not a lot. But we were just talking about covenants and how they're really seen. And when you present a covenant, the first thing you think of is, well, this is a transaction, because the way that Pastor David described it is he said that a covenant is an agreement between two people. So immediately my thought process was, okay, a covenant is an agreement. It's a handshake. It's transactional. But then when we started delving into like the covenant and what it really exemplifies, what it means, what it stands for, I started connecting the dots, and I started realizing that a covenant between me and Christ is really more, it's not transactional. It's more relationship based, as he was describing. It's about my emotions. It's about my feelings. It's about, you know, what Jesus wants for me, the love that he has for me. And I think the biggest thing that Pastor David said that really stuck out to me is that humankind has the ability to say no, but the opportunity to say yes, which translates to me, that covenant is by choice. You choose to have that covenant with Christ. That being said, set up your covenant to be intentional with Christ, to be exemplifying Christ, and to be connecting with Christ. So I think that's what my biggest takeaway was from this past Sunday, is having that covenant with Christ. Again, so important, but it's not really about saying, okay, Jesus, like, I'm going to behave on my best behavior. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to raise my hands when I worship or something like that. It is more deeper and affectionate than that. It is, Jesus, I'm having such a hard day today. Come into my life and flood me with your peace, your love. Or Jesus, I'm having a hard time in this certain relationship that I have. Come and protect me, love me, cover me with your peace and protection and whatnot. And so it really is having that relationship with Christ, having that one-on-one time, that connection, that thread, I always call it. So that's what I got out of it.
Yeah, he did a beautiful job of doing that.
It was
How about you,
awesome.
Kaiser?
Yeah, I kind of got fixated on the relationship part. And the only reason is because, growing up in the church, I've heard that a million times.
Right.
Have a relationship with Christ. So, and you kind of just hear that. And I think in my mind, my thoughts of having a relationship with Christ was the more that I read, go to church, XYZ, know these things about him, that my relationship is now good. Right. That was kind of my just quick thought. And the more that I actually listened to his sermon and thought about what actually is a relationship. And what I've realized is, and this may be just kind of more me, but as I've been more of the tell God what's wrong, ask him for things, this and that, and hey, this is me. I haven't been listening.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And so when you think about that, if I had a relationship with my wife, and I'm not just telling her, hey, this is what I want, this is what's wrong with me, or hey, this is what's going good, this is this. I gotta listen to her too, right? That's a relationship. And so with the relationship with God, and at least again in my life, I realized oh wow, a relationship is a give and a take. I'm not listening to maybe what he has to say. So that's kind of what I got about it, is a relationship is deeper than I really, thought about.
Yeah, that's so good, because I think a lot of us, and whether unintentionally or subconsciously, whatever, we get stuck in that place of, I even said it to my daughter yesterday, because my second oldest, Tahila, God has just gifted her with a heart to pray. She likes to pray. She prays often. Sometimes she'll remind me that we need to pray. We pray every day together when we're going to preschool. But sometimes she'll also pray dear Jesus, let Dad give me, a candy or whatever, or and I'm like, hey, he's not a genie. It's not a
right
of the little whatever that thing was,
magic lamp.
The lamp, right? and hope that you get what you want, because that would be a one-sided and really not codependent, but just toxic relationship. And thank God that Jesus and the Holy Spirit and the Father are so patient and willing to abide with us as we're learning it. But to make that shift is, I think, a landmark in anybody's faith, because I think that's when you begin to really move from cultural Christianity, maybe what Paul would call milk, and then you begin to move into meat, where it's less because true love does not seek itself, right? We learned that from Paul, but it's thinking about others. So when we're truly living out God's love, we're either thinking about what he wants or we're thinking about what other people need, right? And it's not, what can I get from other people, or what do I need from God? And that begins to happen when those questions begin to take place. What's on your heart today? Mm-hmm. One of my mentors told me, when you pray, ask God what questions you should be asking him. Ask him to tell you, what questions should I be asking? And I'd never heard that phraseology before, or framing it in that way. But it was beautiful, because as I began to do that, then different, whether you would say hearing his voice or seeing an image or ideas coming from outside my head began to come, and he began to let me know, like, hey, we need to deal with some deep, more internal things. Like, I appreciate your conversation about needing finances, this, that, whatever. But right now, I'm more focused on the fact that you think you need to prove yourself to strangers or whatever, right? And it was pretty revolutionary for me. But also, I think partly why we don't get there, and you guys can let me know about your experience, but do you think some people maybe don't want to hear what God has to say? What do you guys think, Daniela?
100%. I think sometimes people even choose not to listen. And, that derives from whatever personal conflict you've got going on, whether you had a bad experience at a church or whether you just weren't raised in the church, or whether you had a relationship with Christ and then, something awful happened, or something happened that might have derived your relationship farther away instead of closer, taking that trial and letting, the enemy win that trial instead of using that trial to mold you. And again, this is all a personal choice. Like Pastor David was saying, although we have what were the wordings? The humankind has the ability to say no, but the opportunity to say yes. Again, we all have that choice. Mm-hmm. And so I think just even making that choice is a huge step in your personal life, in your personal walk with Christ, because then that is actively showing that I'm choosing to live this way. I'm choosing to live in connection with Christ. And then that also means that you do have to let Christ exemplify in your life. Yeah,
definitely. What do you think, guys? Have you ever experienced that before? Maybe subconsciously, where we're afraid of what God might say if we listen.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that was actually going to be part of my response to what you said was, I think that would be, at least in my personal life, would be one of the reasons why maybe I wouldn't try to listen or try to ask these things of what do you want from me, is because I'm afraid of the response. I'm afraid of what he's going to say, because I like to mess around with my kids. I like to play around here. I like to go rock climb. I work. I do all these things. But what if God said, hey, on this Saturday you got open, I need you to do this, this, and this. Or that's just a small example, right? But it feels like, he's going to hinder in my life of what I like to do. But in reality, it's the complete opposite. What he's really doing is, this may look as like a hindrance because I want you to do these things, but really you're going to be full of everything that you're missing because you're choosing to listen to me. So it's almost works in reverse sometimes of what it may be. And that doesn't mean that everything he says is always going to be like, it's a negative now, I have to do this and this. But sometimes it may be, and I think sometimes it may be scares people to even, I'd rather not even ask and not even hear it. So then I don't have to face it, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of, my thought on that.
Where do you think that, if we keep pulling on that thread, where does that come from in us, Kaiser? What do you think? I know Danielle had mentioned traumas or whatever. But what do you think?
I mean, if we're going to that extent of kind of what I'm saying, I think that would be my worldly pull of I have one life. I want to live it exactly how I want to live it. No one's going to stop me. I want to do what I want to do. And so when you add someone else to the mix, whether that's a person or whether that's God, sometimes you have to make sacrifices. And at the time, sometimes those sacrifices seem like a burden, where if it's a sacrifice for God, it's never going to be a burden in the long run, right? Mm-hmm. Just the worldly, temporary something. Sometimes, again, I'm just not saying everything he says is going to be this big, whatever it may be. But even just having that remote just pull on you that it may be something here and there that you might have to deal with, I'd rather just not hear any of it, right? That's kind of my thought on it, is that it's just selfish.
Yeah, I think you hit it right in the head. I think it boils back down to what we're going to get into next week with the covenant of Adam, is that ultimately men want to be God. right?
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
wanted to be like God. He wanted to be above God, and we want to be in control. So Daniela, what do you think about, like, how important is it then for us to know God, right? Because obviously, I think a lot of this stuff comes from false assumptions. I don't want to take your answer, but like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, this alludes to like the last point that Pastor David was saying, that since we have the choice, when we choose to have that relationship, it will be real. So being intentional with that, in a sense, is, choosing it to be honest and real and saying, Jesus, I'm inviting you in my life. I'm inviting you to flood my life with your influences, So I think choosing to have that relationship with Christ makes it honest, vulnerable, makes it as if Jesus is influencing your life, overcoming it, welcoming. You welcome that. That is really what makes it real. We can say like, oh, Jesus, I want you in my life, but are you really choosing to believe that, or are you just saying that because that's what we're being preached about, So not just taking that accountability, but taking those actions, those steps to invite Jesus in your life, to make it real, to make it honest, and letting him, recognizing ultimately that Jesus is the authoritative figure in our lives, letting him run that, but not coming to a point where we're like, well, now I want to take control and I want to be Jesus, or I want to take those attributes and say that all happened because of me. That's where I think it's important to keep in check.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of Christian zombies, and what I mean by that is like the call is to come and die. Like the language in the Bible is so harsh against the flesh, like what Kaiser was talking about, and we somehow, whatever it comes from, I mean, there's probably a lot of obviously strategies of the enemy to water down or pervert or to deceive people, but somehow we get this Jesus that we like add to our life, that we want all of the blessings, all of the benefits, all of the what we can get out of it, but we really don't want the obedience, the other side of the covenant, which was the deal was like, hey, I'm going to just give you everything you need or could ever want, and things you can't even imagine. And all that I ask is that you would choose me, right? Care about what I care about. It's not just like this cold law and rules. It's an opportunity, which gives the inference of like, it's better to be in a relationship with God, but because we don't die, we don't really crucify the flesh, I think is why we can get stuck in these cycles. I know it's true for me, where like, sometimes I jokingly kind of say, sometimes being a Christian feels like a split personality disorder, right? There's like the spirit Johnny, the spirit man Johnny, and then there's the flesh Johnny, and they're at enmity with one another. And each day I have to re-crucify the flesh Johnny, because he's always wanting to get out of the grave. He's always wanted to take over. And flesh Johnny doesn't trust God. Flesh Johnny doesn't believe God has my best intention in mind. And flesh Johnny thinks he can do it better. Spirit Johnny knows that no matter what the ask is from God, that I can trust his heart over his words, if that makes sense. Like, they may have sounded like sacrifice, that may have felt like a huge loss for me, but I know because you're good, because you can't help but be faithful, because you can't help but think outside of time, that it's for my good. So I think knowing Jesus and crucifying the flesh every day is pretty much the only way that we can really walk in this relationship that Pastor David talked about, anywhere close to what he had hoped for us to do. So,
and I really like what Kaiser said, and like viewing covenants in the aspect of marriage. I think all three of us can agree that like our marriage works better when we're communicating, when we are, delving in together in the Bible, or when we're just being one unit constantly in meshing our lives together as husband and wife and listening to what the other person has to say. Hey, you hurt me in this way. You know, what can I do to be better? And that's why I was thinking, you know, a covenant is always, when we get married, this is the new covenant, you know, covenant between man and wife and all that. But it's also a covenant between you. You could see it as a covenant between you and Christ and God, because what works in a marriage is also what's working with Jesus. And I really like that comparison.
Yeah. So let's go down that road a little bit. Kaiser, tell me, at least in your marital experience, what have you seen? Like, what have you learned about God? Because obviously that's why marriage was created, through your relationship with your wife.
That's a good question. Yeah, no, I mean, that's funny that you say that, because that's before getting married. I never even thought about it. You know, there's lots of things before you have kids, you don't think about kids. There's a lot of those random things, but when we did get married and we had counseling and stuff prior, that's when I really realized, like, oh, there's no reason to get married if you're not, you know, you're Christian, really. I mean, what's the point, you know?
Right.
And so when you do realize, like, oh, wait, it's all wrapped up, it's all one. That is kind of an interesting thing, but that's kind of a side note. But yeah, I mean, I think that it definitely goes hand in hand. When one person is pulled one way, meaning away from God, and the other one's not, immediately everything's a struggle, you know. And I couldn't imagine being in a relationship or being married to someone it's not equally yoked or anything like that. That would be very difficult. And I pray for anyone that is in that scenario that they can, you know, obviously bring that person to God, right, where they need to be. But it definitely goes hand in hand. I mean, my wife this last year, she's never been one or neither of us really have been one that's good with New Year's resolutions, or even really done them.
Sure.
Kind of more fun things, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Last year I did one where I wanted to go camping with the kids every single month. You know,
that's a great one. I like that.
Stuff like that. But she did. So last year she did to read her Bible every day and read the whole Bible in a year, and she did it. She followed it every day. She actually did it. I was actually very impressed.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't think she could, but it's a big task, you know, and it's something that you got to be driven every day to do it. And honestly, like, after a good 6 months of that, of seeing her do this every day, it kind of got to me where I'm like, dang, I need to not necessarily need to do the exact same thing, but at least need to do something, because here I am just like once in a while read a quick little something on my phone, or I'm watching TV or messing around, and she's back reading her Bible, reading a devotion. You know what I mean? So I think that whether that answers your question in the right way, but I think that it does tug on each other, if one person, that's the negative and the positive, right? So if one person's going down this path of like the opposite, it's going to kind of pull that person, versus if this person's going positive where, hey, you're reading the Bible every day, I kind of want to join that train as well. You know what I mean? So
absolutely, inspiring one another.
He had a little bit of FOMO.
Exactly. But I guess a good FOMO.
In a good way. Yeah. That's awesome.
Absolutely. I think, like you said it really well. I haven't heard it put that way, but if you're like not Christian, then there's really no point in being married. At best, it's a tax, advantage or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, because I think there's so much that's been revealed in my life that otherwise would not have been mined out or put on display, except for in a marriage relationship. Like, I'm not nearly as considerate as I thought I was, and I recognize that because now I have my wife who is naturally gifted in consideration of others. And like you said, it's like, dang, that wasn't even on my radar. Like I didn't make a decision to not be that. I just didn't even think about it. But now I know that weakness exists in me because my wife is strong in it. And so I feel like there's this cool thing about preferring one another and unconditional love, and to be truly known by somebody, all of the funny shapes and sounds and smells and everything, and still be really loved by somebody. It obviously, all of it's supposed to be a picture of God's heart towards us, God's love for us, God's enduring love for us. That's why I think God hates divorce so fervently, is because of all of his creation, nothing reflects his relationship with himself, with the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and then also with his people, like marriage is supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, because marriage, again, is also, it's a choice. It's so easy. I think you see this a lot in like celebrities. Like they are married for like a year or 2 years and they're like, yeah, we're getting divorced, as if it's like whatever to them. And marriage is so much more than that. Like you were saying, Johnny, it's like a choice. Through all of like our partner's flaws and imperfections, we're still choosing to love them. And then you think about it and it's like, through all of my flaws and imperfections, naturally I'm a more self-centered person. And even then I look and I'm like, wow, and Jesus still loves me even when I'm acting this way. So what am I doing? Like, get back on track, stop being self-centered, love the way that you're supposed to. So
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the more you dive into it as well, that really all of your relationships are somewhat the same, meaning you look at your relationship with your husband or your wife, whoever you're married to, and what's the best times when you're in your relationship is when you're both very honest with everything. Hey, I screwed up, I'm sorry, let's do this. When you're surprising them, when you're loving them, etc. Right? Same with God. If you're not really telling the truth with God, if you're not really asking him, if you're not really doing these things, it's not really going to be a great relationship. Well, the same goes if you're single and you have friends. If you're kind of lying to your friends, you're not going to have good friends, right?
Yeah.
Kind of lying to your coworkers.
Yes.
If you're the boss and you're just kind of treating your coworkers like they're coworkers instead of treating them like you would anyone else, it's not going to be a good workplace. Except, so it kind of all bleeds together. Obviously, it starts at one base, but when you kind of think about it, like you should really be treating everyone like that. Yeah. And obviously, with your wife, you're going to have individual things that are more special to you guys. But just the blank statement, I mean, that's really should be for everyone.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And that's what pretty much the point of my sermon 2 weeks ago is how we do the one thing, right? David said, one thing I desire of the Lord, that will I seek, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, dwell within his temple, and to inquire. So the more we can have a correct context of what a godly relationship looks like by looking at Jesus, by experiencing, like Daniela said, his grace and kindness, his faithfulness, his patience, as that essentially standard and framework becomes more clear, then we can have that same exact realization you're saying, Kaiser, is that, well, I should be reflecting Jesus. I should be acting like the way he does towards me, towards others. And literally everything and everyone benefits the more we look like Jesus. I'd said it was the answer for everything.
Yeah.
In Jesus, because whether it somehow fixes a problem or alleviates or causes it to go away, whether or not that happens, what it does is it gives you the mind of Christ, the heart of Christ, the perspective of Jesus in your situation, and you're able to navigate and handle those things how you're supposed to be. It's not a genie, it's not transactional, but it's such a benefit when we are transformed to the image of Christ. There was something you said, Kaiser, that I wanted to dive into some more, but I forgot what it was, so we're going to keep going. Okay. This is the next question. Probably the last one we have time for. David talked about the importance of recognizing God created us in his image. So what does that mean to you guys? Like, what do you think what is he referencing? What is he inferring when he uses that term? Let us make man in our image. We'll start with Daniela. What do you think? And what is the significance of that? And what does it mean?
Oh, man. Well, I was going to say hop to Kaiser because I'm not really sure. but well,
go for it.
In speaking about like being in the image of Christ, like I was just going to say, like, it is so funny is the word that I would use, but it's more impressed how Jesus bleeds in like our everyday lives. And so as far as like being in the image of Christ goes, man being made in the image of Christ, that also means that I'm being made in the image of Christ. And that also means that I have to bleed Jesus every day in my life. And that's hard. I mean, I remember this pivotal moment in my life where the first year of marriage was really hard for Dylan and I, my husband. And I was a very begrudging person. Like, I held on to grudges a lot. And we were just having a difficult time. And I remember praying. And then it clicked in my mind. Jesus forgave me for all of my sins. And if my husband is made in the image of Christ, and I'm made in the image of Christ, why can't I forgive him? And it wasn't really anything like a big argument of a big, thing or whatever. It was really dumb. As like your first year of marriage goes, it was a very dumb argument. But in that moment, I said, if Jesus forgives me for all of my wrongdoings, why can't I just forgive my husband for a simple whatever it was? And so in that moment, it was like a click of like, well, we're made in the image of Christ. And so what am I doing not acting like Christ? So anyways, that's my applicable thing to be made in the image of Christ. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Kaiser?
Yeah, I think that kind of what we were just talking about is definitely a good example of that, of how treating other people, etc. But I think that one thing with the image of Christ that's, I guess, maybe hard to not do would be to say, okay, I'm made in the image of Christ. Meaning, I think the meaning of that would just be, hey, my life should reflect what Christ should look like, right? But I think what's hard is that needs to be in everything, right? And not just like, oh, I'm at church. Like, it's funny when, this is kind of a tangent, but again, growing up in the church, you'll hear, when you're in youth groups or whatever, maybe someone swears or says something they shouldn't do, and someone will say, hey, don't say that, you're at church. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, if you shouldn't say that at church, you shouldn't say that anywhere.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that little example would be kind of, hey, no, you're in the image of Christ. Like, if you shouldn't say that at church, you shouldn't say that anywhere because you're in his image. And so if you're going to act like he's going to act, if you're going to do these things, it should be at work, it should be at home, it should be wherever you are, right? That's kind of what I've gathered from it, of just like, it's an everyday thing, it's an every moment thing, it's every second thing.
Yeah.
Even if it's a small little thing, hey, should I do that? I just took this, it's only $5. Well, it's every little thing. It's not, every like once in a while big thing. So, and again, that's a hard thing to deal with sometimes, because you're like, it'd be so much easier to not have to deal with this, but
right.
So that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this one this morning, and I think what both of you guys said is absolutely like spot on, especially within the realm of Christendom and people who are regenerated and who understand we're being sanctified and transformed in the image of Christ, right? Because that's the language we're used to. But then as I'm like looking at that verse, right? So there is no Christianity, there is no lost and saved. There's none of that in existence, right? This is all pre-fall. And he's literally at the genesis, pun intended, of the human race, this creation. And he says, let us make him, man in our image. And I'm thinking, so that's a what they would call a common grace type covenant. Literally anybody who is made, who is human, it falls under that type of let us make man in our image. At least as I understand it, if it's speaking to the idea of what differentiates us from the rest of creation. Like Pastor David said, we're special. We have the breath of life built into us. I think because originally it was supposed to be everybody, every sequential generation following Adam was supposed to be carrying on this image of this perfect expression of God's creation. being able to reflect God's glory, being able to contain it and behold it. Right? I think about how they were walking in the garden, and giving us like what is it the consciousness that differentiates us from the rest of the creation? Is it emotions? Is it like, and that's what I'm kind of like wondering, like, what is it? All of it, obviously. What were bulls and calves, were those not made in God's image? So like this is a defining special reference, obviously. And then when we find out what that is specifically that he's inferring to, then like you guys are saying, well, then now how do I walk in that 700 or whatever generations later, diluted, depraved, decrepit, broken humanity, but yet still being given the opportunity to somehow in some expression experience God like he had wanted us to through the grace, the covering of Jesus Christ. I think that's so much more there in really understanding what does it mean to be in his image. Because I think we have like obviously the expression given to us in his word, right? That's the standard of what we're supposed to look like. But then yet something else takes place when you're, like we're saying, when you're literally in relationship with Creator God, and he begins to reveal to you through Holy Spirit, unveiling Scripture so it moves from being a list of to-dos to understanding the heart behind it, then I think that's the only way we get back into that image, into that type of a design, back to Eden necessarily, ruling, reigning, dominion, in the right way, not dictatorship, not all these other things we make it to be. So I think it's an pretty interesting thing to think about, right? Pre-fall, the perfect man, the perfect design, and what we're getting into this week. I don't want to give too much, but how God has been working ever since Genesis 3 to essentially not necessarily restore, like to go backwards, but to usher in an even greater expression of what Eden was supposed to be. So, Kaiser?
Yeah, I was going to say it's I had kind of an interesting thought. I don't know if it'll make sense, but it was almost like, so you're saying, right, when Adam was created, he was created in the image of Christ, obviously, and there was no downfalls at that point. No one had sinned, no one had done these things, and then now we've gone however long since then, right, and we've each year, each generation, there's more things compiling on you, and it's almost like someone that was born that's their culture is from, let's say, Germany, but I've never lived there. I don't know anything about it, and it's almost like you're starting by like reading you're starting with grandma, and she's kind of reading you, hey, these are the recipes that we used to do. And then you go to great grandma and she's like, hey, these are the things that we used to do. And you start getting yourself more engulfed in your own culture.
Right.
And I almost think that's what we're doing is we're learning about our culture, which is right. The more you read the Bible, the more you know about yourself and how you should be in XYZ. That's kind of interesting. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, I think this generation of kids that we are raising, I think they're going to be very different, because I think us as parents in this generation, we have been, what I've noticed is that like we're very intentional on how we're raising our kids. And I think that starts with us, visually. When we were talking about it, the first thing I thought was, okay, Jesus breathed life into me. And I'm a very visual person. So I'm thinking, all right, I have the breath of Jesus inside of me. How can I breathe out that breath to everyone around me, including my children? And again, that starts with being intentional. That starts with curating your life, the way that you raise your kids, the way that you communicate with people, the way you share the gospel, how you share your love towards others. That's breathing Jesus's life out word from you. You're filled with that breath. Now I want to push that breath out into my life, my world that surrounds me. And maybe there will be a time where everybody that is pushing out that breath of life of Jesus it'll just cover all of us. It covers our family, our kids, our friends, and that's what makes the difference. That's what starts differentiating us from the outside world.
That's awesome. That's
Right.
good.
I think, yeah, especially in this day and age, there's way more access than ever before to things like podcasts, like churches online, except more. There's churches everywhere. You can literally flood your entire 24/7 of something new, some new speaker speaking, some new something. But on the flip side, there's so much more to get distracted in to not do any of those. You know what I mean? So it's really just trying to keep yourself, keep your kids, whatever it may. Just guide yourselves down this line and breathe in more of that good influence and that good stuff, and try to not worry about the million distractions that there can be. You know?
Yeah. I think the ultimate lesson is that before God, which is even an interesting statement, anyways. Like we're without hope, right? Like we didn't exist unless God initiated this whole process in Genesis 1:1. And so he's the one who breathes that life, and the whole purpose is relationship. So I think that's going to be my thing this whole year and the rest of my life. It's like we got to go back to the source, like you're saying, Kaiser, get all the way back up to the origins of our culture, right? Like our understanding of what does it mean to be a follower of Christ, a godly man, a godly woman. And that comes from just beholding Jesus and spending time in his presence and in his word. So I want to say hi to a couple people who are with us. Teresa, good morning. Miss Williams, I don't want to offend you by butchering your first name. What's up, Cody, and my sweet cousin Jennifer. Glad you guys are here. If you guys catch us next week, Tuesday at 10, be sure to just comment, say hi, or if you have any questions or you want to like jump in the conversation. We would love to have that happen. We are always one to abandon. We have very little form, anyways, but to invite you guys in the conversation, you guys can do that by commenting. Couple of announcements for you guys. February 9th and 10th, we're going to do a marriage conference. We spent a lot of time talking about how we see God, we find God in healthy marriages. And so if you want to sign up, you can go to our website and do that. If you come to our church, you can do it in between or after services. And then also, January 4th, this is a fun one. We're going to do a potluck, an all-church potluck. You guys can come and bring a dish, a side, thing like that. Everybody.
February 4th.
Thank you. February 4th. Did I say January?
Yeah.
February 4th.
February.
No, is it even February? Is that even right? Yeah, that's probably right. After church, we're going to do a potluck, but also we're going to do like this kamikaze karaoke thing. And so if you like to get down and singing your heart out, you can sign up for that as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. But thank you guys for joining us on the cutting room floor. We appreciate you. Hopefully you guys have, your spirits have been kind of turned towards Jesus as you contemplate his word, these ideas, these concepts, and don't forget to behold Jesus each and every day, like King David said. So love you guys, and we'll see you hopefully Sunday or next Tuesday.